London, the equivalent to one child in every classroom is homeless, living in temporary accommodation, a big part of which often involves moving from place to place for families in particular, which can be disruptive. In a report released today by the Shared Health Foundation, the government is being urged to stop children in temporary accommodation going missing from school, something which has been recognised as happening when families are displaced from their communities. Dr. Laura Nielsen is CEO of the Shared Health Foundation and is a paediatric doctor in A&E, and she joins me in the studio now. Laura, thanks so much, first of all, for joining us this morning. Great to have you in the studio with us.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you.
This has a particular resonance for me because I remember when I was growing up, at one point we did live in temporary accommodation, and it is quite shocking when you go from a home into something very small and unknown. Thankfully, we weren't moved around a lot. But let's talk about the Shared Health Foundation and the sort of work that you do.
Yeah, so we're a small organisation based in Manchester, but about 6 years ago I became interested in children who were living in temporary accommodation. I had no idea there were so many children in our country and in our capital living in temporary accommodation. And we spent the last 5 years really looking at the impact of that. What does it mean for families? What does it mean for children? And particularly their health and education outcomes. So as you've explained, it's really unsettling when children get moved, and often at very short notice. And when you enter the homelessness system as a family, you're quite hidden. So a lot of us think about homelessness and we talk about street homelessness, which is a massive issue. But if you think about in every class in London, there'll be at least one child who is living in temporary accommodation. And for some of those children, they may spend the majority of their childhood in various forms of temporary accommodation. So it's a growing problem, but it's a really hidden problem.
What are the kind of key findings that the report really highlights?
So the first one is the scale, which we've known about, but it's increasing. There's 96,000 children in the capital who are living in temporary accommodation, which is just staggering, and it's 160,000 in England. And the second thing we found is that the time periods that children are spending in temporary accommodation and the number of moves they're doing is increasing from what we can see. And we think the government need to have a full homelessness strategy, but also that they need to start mitigating some of the impacts. So we're asking the government to make sure that when a child goes into temporary accommodation, their school and their GP surgery are told, because then both those services can provide support to the family, as at the moment none of those services are aware.
Oh, really? That's really shocking.
Yeah, so schools aren't informed, and we've spoken to a lot of schools, and schools really want to help children do well. They, particularly younger end children, they want to support, and there's lots of things they can do. And when you get into secondary school, we all know that you get penalised for being late or absent. And so when schools know that children are commuting a long way or in temporary accommodation, they can adapt and support that child more. So we think it's a really no-cost, really sensible solution that schools and GPs are told.
The disruption of families and their support systems when having to move from place to place has been highlighted, as you mentioned, as a problem in your report. I'd like to read you a quote from Alicia Walker, who works for the homeless charity Shelter, and ask you to respond if you wouldn't mind. It takes a village to raise a child, and we're not helping raise our children by forcing them to other parts of the country. Parents have to leave jobs. Children might have to leave their schools or face very long commutes. Family lose networks of support from friends and family to doctors and local services. It sounds like that's something that would resonate with you.
Yeah, so we see families moved often across boroughs, often out of cities into other cities. And we don't really know the scale it's happening at. There's no government data even collected on how many children have out-of-area placements and where they go, which is really important. But we know this can happen multiple times. So if you think about a child who might leave school, they come home, they're reallocated to a hotel or a B&B, they're there for a couple of weeks, they're reallocated again to a different hotel, they're moved. And multiple times they move, we know the chance of them falling out of school increases. And it takes a massive toll on children's mental and physical health. We know that the child mortality rate for children living in temporary accommodation is much higher than would be expected when you standardise for other factors. And we know the impact on parents, particularly on mums, is massive. It's very hard to look after children when you've got no kitchen, when you're all squashed in one room, where you're travelling, you spend a lot of money on food, on takeaways, you lose contact with your friends. And so we see the health impacts kind of accumulate over time. And one of the things I'm concerned about is the more we move children and the longer it goes on for, the bigger the impact it is across their childhood and their life chances.
And I mean, mental health must be in a terrible condition from what you're describing, both for the parents, but also for the children in particular.
Yeah, so from anecdotal evidence, we know that children often start misbehaving at school because they're struggling to cope and process what's going on. They often become a bit more dishevelled because you just lose stuff. You know, if you can imagine living in one room, where the heck is the hairbands and the hair clips and everything else you need? And then they fall out of friendship groups and they increasingly become more isolated and bullied. And then for the parents, often any underlying medical conditions, including mental health, is exacerbated. So you lose complete control. You have no idea where you're going to be living the next day. And so we see increases in anxiety and depression. And it does have a massive impact. I cannot imagine bringing up my children. I've got 3 teenage boys who fill every space in my house because they're massive and they eat me out of house and home. But I can't imagine doing that. And then also navigating repeated homelessness journeys.
Yeah. Very difficult indeed. I mean, we'd be silly to look at this as just a London problem. Surely moving London families to the north of England means that families in the north of England are displaced elsewhere. I mean, what impact is the London problem having on the rest of the country?
So London has a massive housing pressure, which you guys know only too much about. But we do see families dispersed. Only about 6 months ago, I was working in an A&E in Manchester and saw a family of 5 children who'd just been relocated up north, all with scabies, which they must have picked up on the way. And that mum, she's from Camden, she had a completely different fashion sense and accent to North Manchester. And I was like, what the heck are you doing here? And she's like, I've no idea. We just landed 2 days ago. Wow. And so all those kids have got to get new schools. She's got to find a new network. And she didn't know how long she would be there for. But the chances are, the way the system works is, at the end of 2 years, she'd probably find herself homeless again, because London councils will be paying a top-up rent to Manchester for the private provider that will disappear after 2 years. So the system is almost designed to recreate homelessness again and again, which is just bonkers.
It is. I mean, we're at the point now where you then have to think, given the report, what you know about what's going on, that there needs to be small, medium and long-term plans in order to alleviate this. What do you think needs to be done in particular, I suppose? What should be the takeaway for Londoners, but also more broadly about how the government approaches this?
So the government have promised a homelessness strategy, which is coming. I really hope that is published soon and that it is well thought through. Some of these issues are very structural and systemic. And we need a proper solution of how we're going to have affordable family housing across the country. And that's not just about house building, actually. That's also about buying back, about increasing the number of rented accommodation available. There's a real disincentive in the temporary accommodation world because landlords are paid higher amounts of money for housing families in temporary accommodation. And so you can see them flip from normal accommodation to temporary accommodation. So it's very complicated. But we do need a proper plan because it's a growing problem and it costs a fortune, like an absolute fortune to councils. It's becoming one of the biggest factors of their financial sustainability. So it needs addressing. And then we also need some short-term and medium-term mitigation to make sure that these kids are safe, that they have somewhere to sleep, that they have a cot, that parents can access food and that children can access education. And some of that does not need to cost an awful lot of money. It's about systems and it's about prioritising.
Who's failing when it comes to that then?
I think we all are, if I'm honest, as a society. We've let this go under the radar. It's only recently we started to talk about it. I've been talking about it for years. It's only just been picked up. It's the whole system is choosing not to see. And I think there's lots that schools can do and the health sector can do, and there's definitely stuff that government can do. And local governments who have lent into this have made a difference. They've made a difference on the cost to them, and they've made a difference on the quality, and they've made a difference on the amount of disruption to children. So it is possible to do. In a city like London, it's probably going to take across, the whole of London coordinating together rather than boroughs playing off against each other. But it is possible, definitely possible to get this better.
It's an indictment on us when you say we're choosing not to see. That's quite a chilling statement.
And that's harsh for me to say, I guess, but I was completely unaware that at my kids' primary school, standing next to me in the playground was a mum who was struggling in temporary accommodation. I was completely aware for 10 years as a doctor working in really quite challenging communities that this was happening in plain sight. And so we all have a responsibility to be curious, don't we? And that who is standing with us at the gates, who's commuting a long way, which children are tired, what's going on. And the small things we can do to help is being friendly and kind and curious, isn't it? And then the structural things, we need our leaders to step up.
And I mean, you say that, it reminds me about community, because there would have been a time where people would have known that there was a problem, whereas now we're oblivious.
Well, and we all feel a bit of shame, don't we? Like, we live in a world where, Instagram and social media and stuff is full of the perfect life. And, if you look at my life, some days it looks perfect and most of the time it's slightly chaotic. And we all have that persona that we're coping and that everything's fine. And particularly our private lives, our home lives. And as a mum, what you want to do is do the best for your kids, isn't it? And when I meet mums and dads in temporary accommodation, they want to do the best. They're kind of stuck and they try really hard. And it's really difficult to say, this is not working, I don't know what to do. And that, particularly as a parent, is very difficult to say. So I think, if you're living in temporary accommodation this morning, hang on in there, get in contact with some of the organisations, Crisis and Shelter, and get support around you, but also tell your friends, tell your family, and let them be kind to you.
Well, and kindness is really key here. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Dr. Laura Nielsen, who's the CEO of the Shared Health Foundation. Well, listening across to that is Vicky Reynolds, who is currently living in temporary accommodation with her 17-year-old son. Vicky, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Tell us a bit about your situation. How much of what you've just heard resonates with you?
Absolutely everything. And good morning, by the way. Hello, everyone. Absolutely everything. It is the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. I have a child who's 17. He's amazing, but he has SEN issues. And we moved out of London and had to come back 3 years ago because he wasn't getting any support for his education where we were. So I came back. I left my job. I'm disabled as well, so I do get quite poorly, but. I came back and my son's flying in the community, in the school that he went to, in the college that he went to. But my landlord unfortunately sold, and we've been put in a hotel which is nowhere near where all my son's activities are, where his support services are, where his college is, where his clubs that he goes to are. They've just pulled him away completely. I don't know anybody here. So the social exclusion is really, really difficult. Like the other lady was just saying, I'm on a limited budget. We have to get takeaways and etc. because we have no cooking facilities, no washing facilities. We haven't got a fridge. And it's got so much for my son that Cam stepped in and said, I think it's best that he goes and stays with your 80-year-old grandmother, like my mother, who lives out in Essex now. And with the help of friends from there, they're bringing him up and down to college. But I'm literally stuck in this room by myself. And he's struggling. He's got exams at the moment and he's in the middle of nowhere, having to get up extra early. He won't come back to the hotel. He was mugged outside here. And it's all too much for him. So I completely understand what's going on. And I'm getting told off if I go to my mother's for a couple of days to help my mother and see my son.
It sounds horrendous. And for you, the mental impact must be huge.
I'm on antidepressants now. I'm talking therapies. Yes, it's very, very hard. And the thing that annoyed me was my doctor, CAMS, like Children and Mental Health Services, his old school, which was an SEN school, everybody wrote, his college, SEN, everybody wrote, the community groups that we attend, etc. Everybody wrote, and said, please do not move him out of the area. It will be too difficult for him. My doctor's written several times, and the housing officer that I spoke to said, I don't care about your letters. He might not be able to go into a hotel or a hostel, but he will be. And they were his words. So I'm I'm really happy to hear about this report, etc., because I do believe every agency should be involved, because housing officers are not medical, they're not psychologists. You know, they're having an impact on children and they don't care because it's just their job.
Can I ask you, so we've had several statements from the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham, and I just want you to respond to this. They're talking about, this is the statement, they said there's been extensive work to support Miss Reynolds and her son into more permanent accommodation following
There hasn't.
Well, let me just read you the statement, and then you can respond. That's all right, lovely.
Yeah.
So, following her eviction from a private landlord who was selling the property, she has been made 6 offers of alternative private rented properties, all of which were in Barking and Dagenham.
No.
In a local and national context of severe housing demand, there are currently 1,364 applicants registered for social housing, requiring the same size of accommodation as Miss Reynolds in the borough. We understand that this is a difficult time for Miss Reynolds and her son, and we are working closely with her to secure suitable long-term accommodation that meets their needs as quickly as possible. Respond to that.
Okay, 3 of those properties that they've offered me, I am waiting for a knee operation, possibly 2 knee operations. I am registered disabled. 3 of them were either on the 7th or the 10th floor. My doctor completely just said absolutely not, because I also have a severe lung disease. So if there's a fire, how am I getting down 7 or 10 flights of stairs? I cannot do it. This is what I'm saying about medical people should be looking at notes and not just housing officers. The other 3 that they're talking about are an hour and half away from my autistic child's college, who doesn't particularly like travelling by himself and has anxiety. How can he do that? You tell me. I don't drive. So how can he do that? I've looked, I've been to see places, and I've looked, and I cannot, he can't get there. So what am I meant to do? We are Barking. Dagenham is huge, and it goes on for miles and miles, and you need to drive, and I don't. So how can you're ripping him away from his group? And now another what they're saying about the 6, 2 were private rented. One was on, I believe, the 4th or 5th floor without a lift, which I can't do yet again. And the second one, I went to see it, and it was really close to my son's college. I was so excited. And when I got in there, it was full of damp. And like I said, I've got a lung disease, absolutely full of damp. I showed pictures to the council. I wrote to the head of the council and said, do you think this is acceptable accommodation that your housing staff are offering people? And I never got a response, but I wasn't moving my son into somewhere that was completely damp. It was rising damp, and also myself.
So where does this leave you, though? Because it sounds like
I'm still sitting in a hotel bidding. I've bidded this week. I was 3rd. So I bid every week except for when there's something that's absolutely not suitable, you know. And I can't get up 10 flights of stairs or down 10 flights of stairs. And if there's an emergency, it would not only be dangerous for me, but for others as well, because they won't get past me on the stairs.
Well, Vicky, I'm going to leave it there, but I do stay in touch with us, because we'd really like to continue to know how you are and how you're getting on. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning. That is Vicky Reynolds, who is currently living in temporary accommodation with her 17-year-old son. Dr. Laura Nielsen is still with me. You're not, I presume you're not surprised by this, but also her point about the medical alongside the council, etc., is a really important point, that they should work hand in hand.
Yeah, so it's a really tricky situation, isn't it? And what we do know is that families that have any kind of special needs, whether that's SEN children or disabilities, stay on the waiting list, stay in a temporary accommodation longer than families that don't have those needs. And also families that are larger stay in temporary accommodation longer. And that is just a sign, isn't it, a symptom of the pressure on our housing system, that, to be fair to the councils, they're playing a kind of giant Tetris game, and they don't have enough of the right accommodation. And so it's another thing to put into the homelessness strategy, is that it's not just about accommodation, it's about making sure we've got mixed accommodation that does have disability access, that does have lifts, that does accommodate a variety of needs. Because if we don't think about that as well, we'll end up with more cases that just get stuck. And it's really difficult. The system is very, very stressful for all involved, I think. It's really stressful for the families, and you could hear the stress in that lady's voice, couldn't you? And your heart went out to her. It's also stressful having sat with the housing officers, because these are Londoners too, who are good people who go into public service, who want to do a good job, and they feel absolutely exhausted by the whole system as well. So nobody's doing well at this. It's expensive. It's not getting the outcomes we need, but I generally believe it's fixable. We are a country that has really good problem solving. We've got quite good systems. When we want to solve a problem, we can, and this is solvable. And the win is massive for our young people. What we know is that the more you give a stable, safe environment for children, particularly in the younger end, the early years, you create the thought patterns and behaviours and mental resilience for life. And so I'm particularly concerned about the number of babies who are born into temporary accommodation as well, and babies who are brought up in hotels. And so if we can get our head around it and see it not as a kind of quick fix, but incremental improvements and a long-term plan, my hope is that we won't be having this conversation in 5 years' time, or the numbers will have been massively reduced.
Well, let's hope, because that's a really important, that would be an amazing outcome.
Yeah, it's great. It's possible. It's totally possible.
Dr. Laura, thank you so much for joining us.
It's so lovely to be here. Thank you.
Really lovely to meet you this morning.